Good day, and welcome to another Ransoms Weekly Wraps. I'm Viv Govender, and as usual, what we'll do is we'll start off with a bit of a macro general market segment and then end with a bit on AI. This week's AI segment will cover the latest results from CrowdStrike, one of our new additions to the AI portfolio, as well as Nvidia, one of the old, the OG AI picks. And in the general market segment, we'll cover firstly the recent upgrades we've seen for SA growth. Then we'll also look at what's been happening in US and European politics. I talk politics a lot. It's a bit of a hobby of mine, but I think sometimes it does make an impact on markets as well. Let's start off with the political situation. So a couple of things to look at is firstly, what's been happening in Ukraine, Russia. For those that don't know, the Ukrainians have now invaded Russia. Remember, Russians invaded Ukraine a few years ago. Now, Ukrainians basically have invaded Russia. Very small amount of Russia, a place called Kursk. It's made a surprise move, depending on who you're talking to, whether or not it's American or Russian, backed people. The Americans think it's, a genius move. It turns this into what some people call a war of, maneuvering, as opposed to a war of attrition. When maneuvering, you like to try and move your forces around. It favors the smaller, speedier party versus a war of attrition where two big forces are attacking each other and the bigger force tends to win. The Russians are obviously the bigger force, so the Ukrainians are trying to change the dynamics of the war, maybe draw people away from the front lines in the other parts of Ukraine to this particular region in Kursk. They have, according to some measures, killed quite a number of Russians. The Russians say they've killed a lot of Ukrainians. It is a very bloody aspect to this war. There's also been discussions of a nuclear power plant that may or may not have been attacked. There's definitely been oil depots attacked, which basically supply Austria in terms of natural gas. Natural gas depot attack that has surprised Austria, which is important because Austria is still, a very to something that depends more than some other European nations on Russian gas. That could mean that there's going to be a instability in the natural gas market in Europe. Still in obviously just entering autumn, but a few months' time it's going to be winter, and that's going to make a big difference, I think, in terms of supplies. So that's obviously something to be looked at. The important thing here is that this is an attack on Russia. Previously, people had thought that this was a red line that nobody would cross. In fact, a few years ago, somebody told you that the Americans and British are supplying, weaponry to a party that's actually invading Russia. People have thought that was a red line that Russia would probably respond to in a way that might lead to World War III. Thus far, it's not happened. Maybe this is a case of the frog boiling, and temperatures have been rising so steadily that there has not been a single point at which anybody has, crossed the red line so swiftly that the Russians have been willing to respond with more force. But you never know with these kind of things. Okay, next thing, weird situation in France. Emmanuel Macron is kind of rejecting the left-wing party, which did very well in the election, basically candidate for prime minister. The reason that this is important is effectively he's kind of done missteps with regards to this whole electoral process that have been, in some ways good, some ways kind of, unexplainable. So let's explain what the background to this is. There was a European parliamentary election. The far-right party of Marine Le Pen did really well. So what he did was he immediately called an election. The reason he immediately called an election was because of a general election, or more general, parliamentary election. The reason he did this was he did it so quickly after the European election that he thought that it would be so quick that there would be no possibility that there'd be a way for the different parties to organize themselves well enough to fight this secondary election or this parliamentary election easily. So he loses one election for the European Union, which is the overall party. He calls an election very quickly thereafter for the French Parliament, in the hope that by doing it as quickly as he has, he kind of caught his opponents back-footed, and therefore that meant that his party could probably be the only party that could stand up against Marine Le Pen's right-wing party, and therefore remain in power. it kind of backfired in a semi, important way, in that people did reject Marine Le Pen's party. They did not win that election, but his party did also win. The left-wing parties managed to basically make an agreement that consolidated power more towards the left. Now, this kind of did not work out for Macron, because he wanted his party to win, or he wanted some coalition of his party and a slightly right-wing party to win. The fact that the left-wing party has won means that, yes, he's defeated kind of like Le Pen, but the left-wing party doesn't support his reforms for the economy, including his pension reforms. If he lets the left-wing party kind of form a minority government in the parliament, his economic plans are gone. Okay, I don't know what exactly he's hoping for right now. Possibly he's hoping for maybe some kind of realignment, maybe some kind of deal to be made where there could be more of a right-wing party put in place that would allow him to keep his pension reforms in place. I don't know if that's going to be possible. It's going to happen probably, or what's probably going to happen, I think, is that this is going to be a very bad period for the French economy, for the French political system. And Marine Le Pen is probably going to continue in the next election to continue that upward trajectory. Yes, she's always losing, but she's losing by less and less each time. This time around, it pretty much took the entire, French kind of establishment to work against her for her to lose. And she did not lose by that much. A few more years of failure, a few more rounds of failed governments, bad economic conditions, etc., etc. And it could be close to a point where you could see the right-wing win in France. And speaking of the right-wing winning, Germany is going to go through some elections in the next month for some eastern states, and it looks very likely that the AfD, which is the right-wing party in Germany, is going to win, or at least be the biggest party in each of these states, and possibly big enough in some of them that it would not be possible to form a coalition against them that could keep them from power. Okay. They have the same issue in France as they do in Germany, where probably one of the biggest parties in Germany is this AfD party. On balance, probably the single strongest party in France is the right-wing Marine Le Pen party, National Front party. But in both cases, what happens is they are so toxic to the rest of the parties out there that they kind of form a coalition to keep them out of power. But the more you form these coalitions to keep one party out of power, effectively it becomes, again, a two-party race. The coalition versus this one party. And if you basically do that, eventually you get to a point where that one party may be large enough to beat the entire coalition together. And that may be happening in a couple of states in Germany at the moment. It's been exacerbated by some stabbings. Coincidentally, there were some stabbings in Germany where I think 3 people were killed by a person of an immigrant background, and that's obviously boosted the AfD. It just happened a little while ago, and so it's going to probably give them a big boost going into this election. And like I said, probably almost very likely to be the largest party in each of these 3 states, and possibly in a couple of them large enough that they could actually prevent a coalition from keeping them out of power. Okay, and then moving on to the US, which is usually the entertaining political situation. RFK, which is the third runner in the third kind of place guy, usually polling under 10%. But he basically has decided to step back from any kind of swing state. Effectively, he's kind of given up the hope of running for the president, even though he had almost no chance anyway. And now he's backing Donald Trump. Not just backing Donald Trump, he's backing Donald Trump, and he's actually campaigning with Donald Trump. Now, on the face of it, this could be very detrimental to Kamala Harris. By most measures, the distance between Harris and Trump is a couple percent. And like I said, Kennedy wasn't, doing very well, but he was polling between 5 and 10%. The worst things I've seen recently was 4%. 4% is more than enough for Trump to win. In fact, like a 1 or 2% swing in Trump's favor, it'll probably be more than enough for Trump to win. Right now, just before we've got the most recent polls about what the calibration of the political system looks like, I think most people are putting it at a slight favorite for Harris. She got a big bump from the DNC, which was the the kind of like the get together by the Democratic National Committee to give her a nomination for the party. She didn't wait; she was just awarded it. And usually after this particular event, either for the Republicans or for the Democrats, you tend to have a huge jump up in a significant jump up in your popularity. And she's getting that at the moment. But that's still we're still about, say, just over 60 days away from the election. And in that period of time, usually these bumps disappear. And Nate Silver, who is the preeminent statistician that usually basically, or pollster, or whatever you want to call him, that usually has been seen to be the most accurate pollster for the presidential elections, has it as a toss-up. And he's talking about the fact that he doesn't know what the effect of RFK resigning is going to be like. This is going to be very significant, an election for markets. Harris is talking about things like unrealized capital gains. She's talking about tax raises. She's talking about some significant moves that could be quite negative for stock markets. And so I do think that as we get close to the election, if it becomes clearer that Harris is winning, you might see this market pull back. If it becomes clear that Trump is winning, you might see the market go forward. Okay. And then let's talk about South Africa. So we recently had ABSA come out and upgrade their expectations for growth for next year to 2%, a whole 2%. Why is that important? Well, we've been growing about 1% for the last 5 years. Our population grows around about 1.5% a year. You grow basically 1%, the population grows by 1.5%. About 5 years, you're talking about 2-3% less GDP per capita over that period. A 2% growth rate is more than 1.5%, so that's a slight improvement in per capita GDP. Now, the fact that we are seeing ABSA come out and a couple other institutions come out as well and talk about growth in South Africa going up by 2 to 2.5% a year. Now, this is by no means enough to keep this country, on track to compete with the rest of the world. India, in excess of 6%. Most of the developing world usually sees 5-6% as a target level. And we in South Africa probably should be looking at the same kind of level. But 2% is basically not falling. And 1% was effectively falling because we're growing less than our population growth rate. That means that we could be seeing a stabilization coming through. And because things are so cheap at the moment, look at ABSA's share price. I would say that, look at ABSA's share price, it's about the dividend yield is close to 9. The P ratio is below 7. That's usually pricing for quite a bit of uncertainty. I think that if you look at that from that point of view, you would say that the market is pricing a disastrous outcome in the future. If we are seeing stabilization, we are seeing growth rates basically slightly above population growth rates. Maybe some of these things may not go up and have, P ratios of 20 or something, but maybe they might get P ratios that are like 10, 12. That's still a significant improvement from where it is right now. Okay, so we are starting to see some signs that we are seeing a local recovery happening in South Africa. And that is important to keep in mind. We've been quite negative in South Africa around, what's been happening over the last couple of years around the economy and so on. And by no means do I think this is a sign that we're going to see growth go crazy. But I do think it's a sign that maybe we can see some valuations recover because at this point in time, especially some of the SA Inc. stocks are being priced at really low multiples, indicating that, they are priced for disaster. And if disaster is not occurring and we have just stagnation, there could be opportunities there. Now, moving on to the two earnings releases we're going to talk about this week. First is CrowdStrike, which we just added to the AI portfolio a few weeks ago. Those in the AI portfolio who have got to get their statements would have noticed we added it around about $221 a share. Last I checked, it was closer to $265 a share in the last 3 weeks. We've done really well on it. We bought it just after the crash in Japan or the disappointing jobs numbers from the US, which we were going to attribute the fall to a few weeks ago. And we saw an opportunity to buy CrowdStrike. And the results from CrowdStrike yesterday seem to indicate that was probably correct. One of the reasons CrowdStrike has been so cheap, just beyond this obviously market fall that we saw recently, was because there was a big embarrassing disruption to their business a little while ago, where like half the computers that are running off this system basically crashed. And it was embarrassing for CrowdStrike. It was a definite mistake on their part. And the question was, how bad was this mistake? Was it going to decrease demand for their systems? It turns out not that much. The share price had fallen more than 40%, right, based on this kind of bad news. And the bad news may not be as bad as people think. So there's opportunity here for this to recover. So even if it wasn't for just the AI portfolio and its opportunity as an AI stock, you might have looked at CrowdStrike as an opportunity to buy into a share that was probably oversold. So we've gotten, I think, a good deal on CrowdStrike. I think the earnings results do indicate that this is probably a situation which is negative for the company, but probably will blow over long term. And I think that's obviously something to be, to focus on. Next, Nvidia. Nvidia's results came out slightly disappointing to the market, despite incredible improvements in revenue, incredible improvements across the board. But remember, this is a $3 trillion company. The market's pricing a lot of improvements in this company. So what were the main takeaways? A couple of things. Firstly, demand, incredibly high. Secondly, they're having difficulties producing. And production is probably one of the issues that they are going to have to be concerned about going forward. They do indicate that they see, some of these bottlenecks kind of disappearing over time. But right now, they still have the same problem where they can't produce as much as they want to produce because demand exceeds supply. Huge demand coming to for data centers. That means that the AI training sphere is still around. And that's one of the reasons we bought CrowdStrike, by the way. CrowdStrike does security. My belief is down the line, in the next 2 or 3 years, if the new models are as good as we think they're going to be, inference is going to become a hugely important thing. That means huge data centers with a lot of your personal information. These AI systems will know everything about you. They'll be reading your emails, reading what you go on the web to look at. They'll be understanding your voice, your whatever. They'll know things about you that you don't even know about yourself. Okay? In that scenario, somebody hacking into your AI system would effectively be hacking into your mind, reading your thoughts, reading exactly everything that you've done in the last couple of years. They'd find out all your secrets, all your whatever. The danger around that would be great. And therefore, I think that the demand for security would be even higher than it has been in the past. And that's why we bought CrowdStrike. But at the same point in time, you're more likely to see people wanting to have more private systems, not just the cloud-based systems that we talked about in terms of protecting their data. And that's going to lead to more demand down the line. Right now, it does look like Nvidia still remains in the race for both the training, which is obviously, I think, it has an unassailable lead there at the moment, but also in the inference aspect, where I think there's more competition there, but it's playing both fields. And I think that in terms of what they're doing right now, it still seems that demand for both is quite high, especially for trading. And one final thing I want to mention about Nvidia, they're taking equity stakes in AI startups. If you're looking at just one company you want to buy to give you access to AI, at the moment, that one company is Nvidia. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to speaking to you guys next week. Cheers.